Donnie?
Yes.
Who's the presenter for this one?
Crystal Hickman.
Okay.
Hi, Joan.
Hi.
So it's good to see folks coming into the room. That was pretty powerful what Julie spoke of. I think sometimes we forget about what got us here, you know.
The host needs to click on live transcripts.
It looks like it's enabled.
Okay, if it's enabled for me, yeah. I'm
Okay.
seeing them now.
Wait a little bit longer, Crystal.
It is 12:28, and I think we're slated to begin at 12:30. Is that correct? We'll give people just a few minutes to arrive.
It's 12:30.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Excuse me. And we only have, is it 50 minutes together? So I'm hoping we can get through all of these slides. Some of them I think we might not stay on too long, but I hope to have a little bit of time to just visit at the end. Go ahead, Danny.
All right, I'll introduce presenter Crystal Hickman. Welcome everyone to Restorative Practice, Creating a Culture of Connection. Crystal is our new School Mental Health Support Services Coordinator at OPI. After having been with OPI since 2015, she has worked in mental health support services for 20 years in a variety of roles. Crystal is a member of the Apsaalooke Nation, Crow Tribe, and is passionate about mental health, wellness for students, families, and communities. She'll be presenting on the restorative practice, creating a culture of connection. You can kind of take from this presentation the basics, understand the basics of our OPI tribal relation resiliency restorative practices, focusing on restorative mindset and talking circles. Participants will experience these concepts of restorative practice from a tribal perspective to better support resiliency in our students and improve climate in our schools. So thank you all for being here, and it's all yours, Crystal.
Thank you, Donnie, and thanks for that introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited to share these good ideas with you. As Donnie said, I've worked in mental health support services for over 20 years now, primarily working with SED youth, or kids with serious emotional disturbances, and their families. And one of the things that I've learned in my time doing this work is that it is almost always about connecting. our kids need to connect with people. And I was fond in my early years. I have since stopped using it, but come to remind people that our kids, when we work with our kids, they don't stop at their skin. They are very connected to their families, to their teachers, to their environments. And you know, part of the process of growing up is growing into your own skin. And so this is the perspective that we're coming from today. As Donnie mentioned, my name is Crystal Hickman, and I am the school's mental health support services coordinator for the Tribal Relations and Resilience Unit. My true name is Bishee Ikyalawish, which in my language means watches as the buffalo go by. And the idea is that there is a watcher high above watching how the buffalo move. And I've always taken this to heart as being someone who can look at what the direction our children are going in. And so it seems like I found myself time and again in situations where I get to help people understand how to influence those movements. And so I take that very seriously. So I'm Crow, Apsaalooke, and I'm from the Mountain Crow. My family originated in Wyola and Lodgegrass, and I grew up in Pryor, Montana, which is also a Mountain Crow community. My mother's family is are descendants of Big Shoulder and well-known buffalo, both relatively close, I think. In our family, we still talk about them quite a bit in our stories and then the things that we share. And in my family, my father's family, I'm a descendant of enemy hunter. So some of the reasons that I come to this work are because of the Crow values that I have learned over my lifetime. And I've listed some of them here. Just cooperation, group needs, privacy, non-interference, connectivity, self-control, participation after observation. I have a story about that if we have time. And then reliance on extended family, patience, understanding that things happen when they should, humility, being good at something, and using your talents for the people. These are all things that are very important and inform the way that I come to you today. This informs my perspective about education, and I hope that you find something in it as well. But the idea here is that educated people are wisdom keepers. They are the people who bring wisdom back into our communities. And that is primarily their role, and the idea behind becoming educated is to help our communities and our people make sense of the lives that we're living together. There are many restorative practices out there. This particular restorative practices was created within the Tribal Relations and Resiliency Unit. And this is really kind of an idea of where we come from in this work. It's kind of a tribal mindset versus a Western mindset. And I really always hesitate to use the verses there. They're just two different ways of seeing the world. And really, they're not always all that different. A lot of times these things happen on a continuum, and that's kind of how I want to present them today. Is if we think about the Western mindset being professionalism coming from the outside in, tribal mindsets tend to come from the inside out. In the Western mind view, fidelity equals paperwork. On that continuum, on the other end of that continuum is fidelity in relationships. And so you can read through this, but the idea is really coming from one perspective to the other and knowing that we all fall on this line in very unique ways. All right. So when we talk about trauma and why we're doing this work, I like to use SAMHSA's concept of trauma just because I think it's probably had many evolutions over the years. But the idea that there's these three big components of trauma. And one is that it's an event, something has had to happen. And the idea of an event is that, or a series of events, is that nobody else can really define what that means. It's very contextual. It's very much about our own individual experience in the world. And so however that event occurs, it has to be marked by the individual. it has to be experienced as emotionally harmful or threatening. And so again, that's very, very individual, and it has there's no prescription for it. There's no way for each of us to say that this category of things are traumatic and these categories are not. It really is an experience. And then it has to have lasting effects, adverse effects on the individual. So the idea is that it has to impact the individual's life. So that event has to be experienced in a negative way, and it has to have lasting effects on the youth or the individual experiencing that. And I really like the idea that this concept is outlined in a way that everybody can come to it. Everybody can put somebody they know or themselves into this situation and really define where they are in their trauma and what experiences they've had. So as the Tribal Relations and Resiliency Unit, we want to become more trauma informed. We want our communities, our educational systems to become more trauma informed. And so these are the things that we're moving towards. We want to realize, we want to spread awareness, we want to realize that trauma is widespread. It used to be believed that trauma only happened to a very small percentage of people. But I think one of the most interesting things I've recently read, if you guys are aware of the ACEs studies, is that after the pandemic, most of our youth are now have a one, just it's a given one, that we have experienced this nationwide global trauma where our lives were very much disrupted, and we are all experiencing adverse effects of those things, of that time. So to be trauma informed, we realize that trauma is out there, but we also recognize how trauma impacts us, the signs and the symptoms. We are able to look out into the world and see that, the idea that what happened is different from what's wrong with you. And so we want to recognize those signs in the symptoms of trauma. And then we respond. We respond to trauma through policies, procedures, actions, practices that we use in order to not react to it. And I think I really enjoy this word in particular because it is to respond to it. And when you respond to somebody, it's more of a dialogue than reacting to it, which is, I think, a lot more emotional and surprising. So we want to respond to it. And then we want to resist re-traumatization. So we know a lot of our kids out there, who experience a lot of verbal and emotional abuse at home may come to the classroom, and even though they are defining their own trauma, they're defining their own event. And so even if we are not necessarily feeling or communicating in a negative way, our kids can maybe feel that way. So today we're going to talk about a couple of the practices, but I wanted to share with you the spectrum of practices that at Tribal Relations and Resiliency we can talk about and hopefully will in the future. Today we're really focusing on the restorative mindset and talking circles. But there's also a restorative inquiry process and a restorative dialogue process that are very, very valuable. And I think that once your communities decide to adopt this restorative mindset and talking circles, it naturally leads into the inquiry and dialogue. So I want you to know that those are out there. They're part of the evolution. And I hope that if you have questions about that, you can certainly get hold of me or Donnie or anybody in the Tribal Relations and Resiliency Unit, and we can talk more about that. So today we're going to talk about the mindset. We're going to focus on 4 different areas: the inherent worth of the individual, the relationship standpoint, the commitment to the process, and the investment in balance. And for me, as you know, the primary author of this particular training, not of restorative practices in general, but from this perspective, these are really important pieces of the work that I've done over the years, but also they really are informed by my culture and by the way I was raised. I was raised by my grandmother. And so a lot of these things are just really, really part of who I am. So when we talk about each individual is inherently worthy and valuable. And one of the things that I really just always remember is that my grandmother, and she's left us now, but she never yelled at me. She never hollered at me. She never said anything that would take me down a little bit. That's not to say that she didn't get after me. She certainly did, and she would talk to me. But she never made me feel less than I am, and I can remember her really uplifting me in most of the time. And so I really feel privileged to have grown up that way, in a way where I was uplifted as much as possible. And I knew from the way I was treated that I was good, that I was essentially good. And this is the perspective I've carried into the world, because we know that our kids are essentially good. We know that they exist in a matrix of relationships. No one youth exists by themselves. They are informed, everything that they do is informed by their peers, by their parents, by their communities, whatever communities those are, whether they're spiritual communities or organizational communities. We know that they have their own story and that they have shared stories. And this is a really important piece right here, is knowing that our kids share stories and that we are, in fact, part of their shared stories. And so our relationship is writing that story as we move through it. We know that our kids have the capacity to change their own behaviors. And this, after 20 plus years of working with emotionally disturbed youth, you might think that I might not have this particular mindset, but I've been very fortunate and very careful about maintaining the idea that our kids can change. And I've seen amazing things. I've seen kids that I've worked with, whose children I've worked with, make changes in their lives. So it's just something we have to believe. This is an integral part of the mindset, is knowing that everybody has the capacity to change their own behaviors. And we know that each person impacts their community. And part of the understanding of this is that there's nobody that doesn't count. Everybody is important. Everybody matters. We don't know how they're going to unfold in the world. And we don't know what part our story, our part of their story will play in that. But it's important that we understand that as we're interacting with them, that they do impact their community. They impact the world. So when I was naming this particular presentation, I thought, what are we really getting at? What is it that we really want to move towards? And for me, it has and remains to create a culture of connectivity. And I feel truly that I came from a culture of connectivity where that was the norm. And I went through college and my early professional years, understanding that that isn't the place where a lot of people come from. That there's a huge value on being independent of others in mainstream society. And I felt very at odds with that growing into myself as a professional, because it wasn't about my individual achievement, and it shouldn't have been about my individual achievement, but about our achievements, our movements. And that really is a part of that culture of connectedness. So in order to get there, though, we really have to understand some really basic things about people and humans. And one is that we're always in relationship. We are always in relationship with one another. Right now, even in this particular place where I'm mostly seeing names, I'm still in relationship with you. We have a listening, hopefully listening and sharing space that we're in together. And so I have a responsibility to you. We know that positive connections, when that relationships that we have are positive, that those relationships become less disposable. And this is really important when we think about the world we live in today. we've had a lot of family stuff going on lately, and I've just been appalled at the sheer amount of cups and paper plates and cutlery that we've used to throw away just because we have some family stuff going on. And we throw away everything. We throw away everything. All our kids have grown up with the idea that when you're done with something, you just throw it away. But when you come from the relationship standpoint, you understand that relationships really aren't disposable. And that is more important and more perceivable when there are positive connections established. Leaning into one another is valuable and important. In a world that really values independence over interdependence, it can be very easy to move away from others. But with our youth, with our kids, with each other in the work that we are doing, it really is important that we lean into each other to get past those awkward moments and really connect with each other. Because once there is a connection, those difficult things matter less. And so leaning into one another, leaning into our youth, leaning into their lives, leaning into their hurts, all of that is a really important part of the relationship standpoint. Learning how to develop those relationships is, it says here, an integral aspect of education, but I think it's also just an integral aspect of our role as adults, teaching children in any context, whether that's at school, with our own children. The idea is to, pardon me, my window popped up. Part of that is just learning that how our kids learn by watching. And so being able to show them how to have positive relationships is as important developmentally as them learning math or English or anything else. And then harm in the restorative practices and from the relationship standpoint, harm is actually fracturing relationships. When things are broken, when relationships are broken, that is what we perceive as harm. And harm is what we are looking to minimize, excuse me, or repair. So when we commit to a process of restorative practices, we understand a couple of things. One of the things that we understand is that connection and relationships develop over time. It takes time. And in order to develop a restorative practices outlook and a restorative practices way of interacting in the world, or just relationships in general, the idea is that we need to invest time into that. And when I say, develop over time, sometimes and a lot of times that means that we're not going to be great at it at first. We've got to really even invest in our own failures. We have to come up against the things that aren't easy and figure out how we're going to do that. We know that interactions are more meaningful when there is a connection in a relationship. Years ago, I read a small thing about, in order to learn something, we have to hold it in a space of belief. First, we have to understand that it can happen, and then we can use our critical thinking skills to then discard it or to believe in it. But so the idea is that we have to have some sort of connection in order to get to that space. Then we know that being in relationship is inevitable. We are in relationship, as I said, right now, even in this moment, we're in relationship with one another in the chat, and on the screen. But that connection is completely optional. We don't have to connect with each other. We have to be in this space together, but we don't have to actually connect. So when we talk about commitment to the process, we really know that we have to be flexible, adaptable, and responsive. That's just, just a given when we're talking about processes in general, but really important when we're talking about the idea of developing restorative practices. The idea of being flexible and adaptive and responsive might seem almost too basic to be touched upon, but it is really important that we know where our strengths are when we're talking about being flexible and adaptable and responding rather than reacting. So really taking time to take stock of who we are and how we connect. And then knowing that our youth yearn to connect. they literally, they're hardwired for social connectivity, and that they want that. And so it might not happen immediately, but if you are persistent, it will happen. So they will commit to the process as well. Okay. The last section in this mindset section is investment and balance. And for me, investment balance, I've had this lifetime of moving towards the idea of justice. And for me, in the end, it really comes down to balance. And I don't know, I think there's millions of ways, well, maybe not millions, but hundreds of ways, dozens of ways to really define what justice is. But for me, I've come to just the basic idea of balance. So when we are balanced in the way that we're connecting with the people around us, I think justice and equity just naturally happen. We are more aware of one another, and so we're able to just respond in a way that is important and understanding of each individual. An investment in balance really is an ethic for equity and equality. It requires introspection. Our kids are not, in this world, in this time, in this age, they're not really given the idea or the value of introspection. And so that's one area that we can really focus on. We can really share with them the idea of, or the skill of being introspective. And giving them the time and the space to do that, to really think about how they feel and understand something. And then when we invest in this process, we commit to that balance, there's just less judgment. I mean, if we're truly trying to connect and understand the people around us, we understand a lot more and there's less judgment. And so that just is a natural process. So we're going to get into the idea of circles now, but were there any thoughts or ideas that rose to the top for you in these last few minutes, this first section? Okay. Okay, so we're going to move into circles now, and I love circles. I think circles is probably one of the most basic things that we can do in the world. And what's insane is that this isn't new. This is as old as time, and I'm not sharing anything that's unusual or different with anybody here today. But circles is just a general format that we can use to kind of get to the space where our mindset for connectivity is exactly, Amy. Most of she says mostly that our students' voice is important in our classroom and community. Absolutely. So in the circles is it's a general format that we have seen works in the classroom to uplift our youth voices, our students' voices. And a couple of thoughts before we even begin to get in here is for years as a facilitator in different areas, I used one small rule called the step up and step back. And so if you're somebody who talks a lot, I would ask you to maybe step back a little. And if you're someone who doesn't necessarily talk very much, I would ask that you step up a little. But one of the things I love just right off the bat about circles was that made that unnecessary, because circles gives equal time to everybody. And I just thought, amazing, such an amazing small skill to have. But here we go, circles. So first of all, it's a strategy for creating positive relationships. It is a strategy for building relational skills. It's a very intentional process, and it's a simple process, but also it's adaptive. And we can use it in a variety of ways and any time in our classrooms, in our other groups, in our staff meetings. It is truly a basic format that we can take with us anywhere. So as a strategy, circles, the goal is to create an intentional situation in which participants feel heard, respected, and valued. And all of those words are important in this particular goal, but we are creating it. We are doing that creation on purpose, and we are creating that situation where everybody gets a chance to talk in a way that is respectful and valued. So as each person goes around, they get to have the same level of respect and value for their words as each other person in the circle. And yeah, I just really feel like that is kind of how I grew up. That's how I was raised, that everybody's voice is important. So the result is to create positive relationships and promote social emotional learning, because it is talking with one another, sharing stories. Those are all things that are contribute to the idea of ourselves as social, connected human beings. The method is to open this, and this is a super, I mean, if you don't take anything else from this, take this little sentence, because it is the beginning of how circles works. And that is that you open an intentional space of sharing, you take turns checking in with the circle, responding to a set of prompts, and then checking out with the circle, and then you close the circle up. And that is truly, in essence, what we're going to talk about in the next few slides. We are going until, is it 1:20? Is that right? Or 1:40? Somebody?
1:20.
Thank you. Thank you, Donnie. Okay. So I'm going to step this up a bit. So again, we just went over the general idea of circles, but to the general circle format is just this. It's a little flow. We gather in an open circle with a centerpiece, and the centerpiece is part of the process of creating that circle space together. So it's a separate activity that you can do with your group. Then you introduce a talking piece, and the talking piece can be absolutely anything that you feel is important. So we do circles in my family. I'm not gonna. It's a little cheesy, but I do it anyway because I really do believe them in that much. And ours at home is this little turtle. It's a little metal turtle. So, and that changes. Sometimes we'll ask somebody else to bring their talking piece. Then we have an opening event, and that opening event can be anything from 30 seconds of silence to, a quote that you want to share, to a story that was impactful and kind of relates to the prompt. And then you review agreements, and agreements also is an activity that you can do with your group, with your students, with your staff, to really come up with ideas for how we're going to relate in this circle. I think for our purposes, those are just really general. Then we do a check-in round. Just everybody checks into the circle. We have a discussion round, and then we check out. And then there's a closing event. And that opening event and that closing event are really important because when we're doing this with our students, we want to come into a space that is very much intended to be a sharing space. And so that is kind of the door we walk through to get into that space, and the door we walk through to get out of that space. And that helps our kids transition between these, this and some of the other things that we do in our classrooms. So as a facilitator, I think that is really important to know where we are at. If we're going to do circles, when we step into those circles, we need to know that we're creating this space, we're holding this space rather, for our fellow circle participants to walk into. We need to know where we're at. We have to know that we are hosting the space and that we're responsible for that space as well. So in order to do facilitation, there's skilled facilitators have a kit of phrases. These are just a few that I've used in circles that I found very, very helpful. I like saying, I think I hear you saying, to help clarify. Comments about this are hurtful because tough things do come up in circles. And as facilitators, we need to be able to stop in those moments and use that teaching opportunity. This is an important discussion, but helps us move along. Let's review our expectations if somebody is kind of falling outside of those agreements that we've made, or so far we've agreed that this is true, let's move on. And then of course, I'm sure you guys all have your very own. I'd love to see them in the chat if you guys have any that you want to share that aren't on this particular list. So we have about just about 10 minutes, and I wanted to get a chance to do a circle or show how a circle is done. Let me see. So I wonder if I could get a few people to volunteer, like 2 or 3, and we'll go through it together. If you would like to volunteer, please turn on your camera and join me. Also unmute yourselves. Okay, well, we have a few, just a few minutes so I can go through this particular circle. You guys are welcome to use the circle however you want to get it. We can definitely give it to you. But this circle is just checking for understanding. And you can use this. I think one of the things that's valuable about the circle process is that sometimes people show or believe somehow that circles are about just feelings. And that's true, they can very much be about feelings. But in this particular case, we're just gonna ask for people to share what they think. And I don't know, I think that kids are very responsive to sharing about what they think. So, in this one, we just open for 30 seconds of silence. That's that door we walk through. And then we ask our students to consider this particular quote, which is, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And then we do an introduction of ourselves. Generally, in the check-in, you can do anything. A lot of times, if we don't have a lot of time to do circles, we can say, give me 1 or 2 words about your day so far. And when that happens, we get through it. In this case, you can do as much as you want or as little as you want. If it's a newer group, it's nice to know a little bit more. Take this opportunity for everybody to get to share a little bit about who they are. And then we start with our first prompt, which is, what comes to mind when you contemplate the quote above? And this, at this point, we start with the circle with our talking piece, and we share what we have to share, and then we pass on to the next person, and then they respond to this prompt. And what is wonderful about this is that we're just talking about what we think, and everybody gets an opportunity to listen and to share what they think. When the second prompt comes around, we say, how have these ideas impacted your work? If so, or have these ideas impacted your work? If so, how? And that gives us a little bit more of an opportunity to share our thoughts. And the magic about this, of course, is that we all Did I lose you guys somehow? Whoops. Okay.
Crystal, that was me. I'm trying to figure out how to unmute everyone because they said they can't.
Oh, I see. Oh, that makes me feel better. I was like, wow.
Yeah, they're not ignoring you. They're fighting to get unmuted in their video shares. So I'm not.
I'm so sorry, you guys. All right. So, but we're just going through it now. So, I think I don't want to keep you too long. So, let's see, where are we at? So, in the closing, we would just do some sort of a small sharing in order to step out of that circle, that kind of closing space. And that is, here in this particular circle, you can read the Benjamin Franklin quote I have up here. Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. And this was my attempt to involve people, but I forgot to check for the ability to unmute. So I really hope that at some point you guys are able to try out a circle, or maybe if we can have some time at the end if somebody has done a circle, what they think. But the idea really is super simple. You can see up here that what we have up here is just a very simple format. You can use it for anything. I've heard teachers who used how did that reading assignment how did you, what came to mind when you read the assignment today? How does this relate to your life? It could be, you know, a quick check-in can be who understood the math lesson today, holding up, you know, 5, totally understood, nothing, I need a lot more help. And just kind of a way to check in with you, our students. All right. So, you know, when we go through these circles and experience them, we really do understand what it takes, how to be patient. As an adult, I have a hard time being patient when somebody says something in a circle that I am just really, really excited about, and I really want to respond to it. But I have to practice patience because I don't have that talking piece. It is not my turn to talk. And I think that's just really powerful for me as an adult to have that space and that experience and that practice, being patient and listening. And the idea of reflecting, we're asking people to reflect, which is really, you know, our kids love this stuff. I've never been in a group of kids, honestly, I've never been in a group of kids where nobody wanted to share what they thought. They get so excited. The idea of sharing, exchanging stories, reflecting together, sharing an experience that is positive and respectful, adhering to the agreements that we all created together. These are all things that build those relational skills that we really want to see in our youth, because when they have those, they do better. They just do better across the board. And I've marveled in grown-ups, adults, teachers, students, small children, to see that this space becomes very peer normalized. I've seen people who are very well known for talking at length, you know, after 4 or 5 people respond to their prompt in 30 seconds, that they tend to be much shorter. And kids who, you know, might say only 1 or 2 words, you know, after 6 of their classmates have shared a little bit more, they're emboldened to share a little bit more. So these relational skills just create a really positive space to teach how to relate to one another. And I think that's just that's just powerful all by itself. We talked about it being an adaptive action. It really is. I mean, the circle format is a process. And the thing I love about processes is that they're not created formulaically. I mean, they're not created to just happen just like this. It's a process. We do each part in order to get to the next part. And that can happen in any, you know, however that happens, however that works out in that particular space is how it was meant to be. Again, a pretty tribal mindset is it will be what it is supposed to be. So circles can be used to help reach a variety of objectives. It can be social emotional learning. It can be understanding the assignment. It can be addressing difficult situation in school or in classrooms. Whatever you need, you can adapt a circle process for it. So a circle can be 10 minutes and it can be a half an hour. It can fill space, or it can just be used to bring people together, our students together, so that we can move on to the next thing. I think, you know, we've all been in those situations where a group of kids just can't seem to move on. But when we give them a tool to process and to reflect, it gets a lot easier to move past some of those things. And then circles just promote a peer relational culture, which I just feel when our kids are working together, are in relationship to one another, that they adapt to situations a lot better. All right. Oops. Okay, so in our circles, things come up. Circles have been around long enough, you know, aside from the millennial that they've been around before we put them in PowerPoints, but in Western PowerPoint processes, they've been around long enough for people to come up with some common common challenges that happen. And I throw these in here because a lot of times these are the questions that we get. Like, so it's taking too long to get into a circle. Well, there's so many ways to address this. The one that I love the most is the last one up here, which is ask the students to come up with the solutions. If your kids are not getting into circles in a timely way, ask them, what is it going to take for us to be able to do circles? Like, what do we need to do this faster? But there's other things too. We can practice circling up. You can circle at a consistent time, so it's part of your weekly schedule or your monthly schedule, so they know that time is coming. You can make a plan for the furniture. If it's taking too long to move the furniture aside, literally plan for how that's going to happen. Consider alternative circling spots if your space isn't well done or well suited for circles. Come up with a different place to do those. Okay. The circle is taking too long. We want to ask for check-ins to be maybe check-ins 1 or 2 words. Sometimes you can even use that for prompts, depending on. I stack my prompts, and so if the prompts I really want to get to, I make those are the first ones. And so if we need to take one out, we take that out towards the end. We want to be flexible with prompts. If like I said, stacking is really helpful. So if it's the prompt that you really want them to respond to, the most important one you put at the top, and then you can just kind of move them around. And I wouldn't be afraid of like just adjusting them during the circle too, once you guys have a pretty steady routine down, or even asking your students to, how can this prompt, what would you like to hear from one another? So I think that can be really powerful ownership tool for our kids in those circles. And then using facilitation prompts to move students forward. Time spent allowing kids to feel heard is well spent, and that's really important. I guess that one, my important ones are being stacked at the bottom. I didn't realize that, but that is really important. Time spent allowing our kids to feel heard is time well spent. It may disrupt a part of your schedule, but in the end, you get more from knowing them and from letting them reflect and letting them peer regulate and having that structured time to share who they are. All right, there are derailing behaviors. This one, oh my goodness, this one's, this is where we have to commit to the process, but it's doable. It's completely doable. We want to, in those moments, those are where our facilitation skills become very useful. We want to stop some of those moments and revisit our agreements and say, we agreed that we would, or when we created our ground rules, we said we would, and revisit those, bring them up as we go through them. I think sometimes people think in circles that as a facilitator, you have to be quiet as well when you're in the circle, but that's not necessarily that's not even desirable. We want to help our kids be in this space together. If kids are really good at derailing, have them come up with to be a circle keeper or a timekeeper. Have one-to-one restorative discussions with them at a different time. Students are sharing about private family issues, abuse, suicide, drugs, or alcohol. This is a really, really hugely common challenge and fear. And sometimes this particular challenge can inhibit, just stop people from even trying to have a circle. But really at the beginning, explaining some things could be really helpful. Explain what a mandated reporter is, and tell them why that is important for them to understand in this particular circle. If you're in that situation and a youth is oversharing, affirm them. Say, I can, that this is a really important thing. I'd love to talk with you more about it. I think we should talk about it more. Let's get back to the prompt, or let's check in afterwards. Use your facilitation skills to address what is appropriate. Create a plan with your partners, with the teacher. If somebody is melting down in the circle, have a backup, somebody who can take that person and spend some time with them and really figure out what's going on. And then follow up with school officials, mental health providers, and nurses immediately after the circle. Make sure that those kids are being taken care of, because, and it will happen. Our kids are not put into situations where they are allowed to share, reflect, or talk about what's going on in their lives very often. We aren't even given that space. I mean, in my close team, we did circles on a regular basis, and it changed everything about the way we related to each other. There were things that we just didn't even know about each other. We didn't know we believed these things, and so it's really important to have a plan for sharing, managing some of those challenges, because none of us are really good at sharing. So we don't have a lot of time left. We have about 3 minutes left, and there are some things about that you should bring to the circle if you're going to do circles. Make sure that you have a solid understanding of what your communication skills are, what your strengths are, and where you need some help. Be really good at listening. Practice your facilitation. You don't have to be great at it to begin with, but give it some practice. And then reflect on what it is that you bring to the circle and what you can improve. And then finally, bring these values to your circle. You have to be enthusiastic about your circle. You have to believe that everybody wants this space. And if you do, your kids will believe you. But if you come at it, with your head down and your feet dragging, probably you're going to get that response as well. Commit to it. Be flexible, and really focus on equity when you're doing these circles. There's ways to implement your circle process. I'm happy to talk with those about you later in a different space. And we have lots of tools. So I wonder if there are any questions or thoughts that we want to share in the next 2 to 3 minutes.
I'm not sure if, I think I said that they can unmute themselves. Crystal, Amy's asking, go back about 4 slides.
Okay. Could you go back about 4 slides to this one? Guiding questions? So we didn't actually talk about specific agreements, but the idea of agreements really is just coming up with agreements. There's a wonderful book called Circle Forward that we have a few of them that if you're interested, we could certainly share with you. But one of the activities at the very beginning of the process of creating circles in your classroom is really to come up with agreements. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can write them on paper plates, on cards. You can ask your kids to draw pictures, but what of the things that they value, and then create those together.
All right, Crystal, thank you so much for coming in and presenting on this. Thanks to the participants here. We do have trainings that our Relations and Resiliency team does provide. There will be one in Salish Kootenai in the near future. So we wanted to design a restorative practice training from an Indigenous perspective, and Crystal Hickman and her team has done so beautifully. So thank you, Crystal. Crystal, thanks to all of the folks in this group.
Thank you all for being here today.